Syd Cain, his drawing, his draftsmanship, his art shaped numerous James Bond films, beginning all the way back with Dr. No and leading all the way to Goldeneye. He also worked with directors such as Stanley Kubrick and Alfred Hitchcock, and later in his career worked on storyboards for films such as the classics, such as Who Framed Roger Rabbit and A Muppet Christmas Carol. And sometime in the late 90s, he drew this dinosaur drawing. Look how dramatic it is. The sky is turning a sunset red, a carnivore is jumping over a chasm, and the frame is full of numerous creatures. But when it comes to Syd Cain, this drawing, and my connection to it, we will leave that for a little while and begin by focusing on the career of the man himself. Syd Cain was born in April 1918 in Lincolnshire and found he had a talent for drawing. He cultivated this talent and, well, it would later come in useful. But first, during the Second World War, he served in the RAF, where he was involved in a plane crash in Rhodesia, which is modern-day Zimbabwe, which led to him breaking his back. Not long after this, he was also struck by lightning, so he had quite a run of bad luck here. Nonetheless, this would change. Once he had recovered from these injuries, he became a flight control officer at RAF Tangmere, so he was back in England, and one day, when he was in the tower, doing his duties, a group of filmmakers came to visit. They were making a film about the Royal Air Force, and RAF Tangmere in particular, and they wanted to create an exact set of RAF Tangmere, the control tower and the control room. Syd Cain, seeing that these filmmakers wanted to understand the layout of the room and the control tower in general, offered to draw a plan for it for them, and he did so, and gave it just as a gift in passing. They were very struck by the skill of the draftsmanship that this illustration demonstrated. From this they knew not just the dimensions of the room, but also the elevation, and they could use it to make the set that they desired. And one of them even suggested that, well, he could have a career in film, if he so chose. Syd Cain had never realised that draftsmen were, well, part of the film industry, that this was something that studios needed. Nonetheless, 2 weeks later, a fortnight later, he was discharged. The war was over and his service had ended. Now he was out of work. So, living in Ealing, he thought back to these filmmakers and thought, well, why not see if there are any opportunities in the film industry? He therefore first went to Ealing Studios but found that there were no open spots at the minute for someone with his talents, but they pointed him to Shepherd's Bush Studios, otherwise known as Lime Grove Studios, which, funnily enough, was where the filmmakers who had visited the control tower had come from. There was another funny coincidence, and that was that the manager of the studio, one Hal Mason, was an old friend of Syd Cain. So, through this connection, and through having demonstrated his abilities already, he got a job there. Throughout the late 1940s, he continued to move forward with this career, working for various studios, including Shepherd's Bush Studios and Denham Film Studios, and would eventually meet Albert R. Broccoli, otherwise known as Cubby Broccoli. If you're a fan of the James Bond films, then you probably recognise this name. Cubby Broccoli was the man who would later bring the James Bond series, the James Bond franchise that we know, to life. At the moment, though, he was part of Warwick Film Studios, and Syd Cain did some work with them. The first real job that Syd Cain was the senior art director on, associate art director he was credited, was Stanley Kubrick's Lolita in 1962. And it was straight after this, once again released in 1962, when Syd Cain did some work for Albert R. Broccoli, Cubby Broccoli, on Dr. No. Syd Cain was more specifically in charge of art direction on the Jamaica sequences of the film Dr. No, and one of his most notable contributions was the so-called dragon tank. You can see an illustration of it here alongside how it appeared on screen, and you can see just how exact they were in bringing Syd Cain's drawing to life. Unfortunately, you won't see Syd Cain's name in the credits for Dr. No, as the person compiling the credits accidentally left it out. Now, when they realised this mistake, it was too late to redo the whole credits for the film before it was released, so Cubby Broccoli gifted Syd Cain a solid gold pen as an apology, and as they continued to work together over the years, this apology must have been accepted. The next year, 1963, Syd Cain would work again on a James Bond film, From Russia with Love, and he would design the spectacular room where there was a chess game in the film. This was a set that cost $150,000, so they must have trusted him quite a bit in his abilities to, well, bring a concept to the page, which could then be brought to life under his instruction. I'll pause here, because reading an interview with Syd Cain, he does emphasise the fact that he was a part of a team. This is a collaborative effort, so it's not that all credit should go to him. No, he was part of a team, and he did his duty. He made designs that could be taken from his drawings, made into props, made into sets, with clear instruction, and all working toward the vision that this particular project had. He was a draftsman, he was a artist, but also a craftsman who could specify details that could be brought to life by other departments and even built upon. When it comes to the Bond films, after From Russia with Love, he was the production designer on Her Majesty's Secret Service, 1969, and also supervising art director on Live and Let Die, 1973, the first Roger Moore film. His last collaboration with the Bond franchise came in 1995 with Goldeneye, when he did various storyboards for the project, so not a art director or a production designer, but a storyboard artist. He took on various roles throughout his career. Aside from the Bond films, he also, in 1972, worked with Alfred Hitchcock on Frenzy, and in the film there's even a sort of in-joke about a horse in a horse race who is being bet on and is owned by one Mrs. S. Cain. Another of his earlier works, 1963, so when he was involved in the Bond projects, he was also doing production design for Cliff Richard's musical Summer Holiday, so there was quite a lot of range throughout his career. Going back to the RAF aspect, he did work for the film Aces High, and in 1998 he did storyboards for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Not long after this, he also did storyboards for another classic of that era, A Muppets Christmas Carol, 1992. Looking at this interview again, there is a little quote I want to give. I feel it brings out his character quite well. The interviewer has asked him, "Can you explain the difference between the terms production designer and art director?" I don't quite know how to start this one, because I've always had a thing about the term art director being quite sufficient for the job, and a title to be proud of. Production designer was brought in by someone who wanted to be a cut above the art director. Let's put it that way. In theory, production designer should design the whole look of the film. In other words, he should be responsible for the way it's lit, costumes if it's a period film, makeup if it's horror, and so on, which doesn't happen in actual fact. And now I feel that it's only an excuse to allow what was once known as an assistant art director to be called an art director for tax reasons, to be quite honest. You see, anyone below the rank of art director is on pay as you earn now. And art directors and production designers can be on Schedule D, and this is why you have these titles. Also, according to Act ruling, you can't have a production designer without an art director. It's all very complicated. What I like about this answer is just how down-to-earth it is. He isn't one to be too fussy about the terms production designer and art director. He is an artist, he's a draftsman, he helps to shape the visual language of the film. That's his job. Whether he's called a production designer or an art director, that's hardly his concern. Syd Cain died in 2011, having worked behind the scenes in the film industry for over half a century. And his artworks, the artworks that he created, helped to shape the visions of these spectacular films. And besides these filmic works, he also did one illustration that I hold quite dear, one that depicts the age of dinosaurs. So let's tell the story of that. I was visiting my grandparents. I'd taken my little plastic dinosaur toys with me. I must have been around 5 at the time. So this would be at the close of the 1990s, probably around 1999, on the eve of the millennium. And my grandparents, they lived in Little Marlow, just outside of Marlow, whereas we lived in Marlow Bottom, just outside of, well, Marlow. Opposite my grandparents, there lived an artist chap. My grandparents and my parents knew this man lived just over the way, and, well, there wasn't much more to it than that. They knew that he was an artist of some sort, and he was very friendly and neighbourly. Now, on this occasion, when I brought along my dinosaur toys, he spotted me out front playing with them and went about drawing this. So when we visited my grandparents again, there was a gift waiting for me. And I don't suppose this was anything more than a couple of hours' work for Syd Cain. It's funny, you don't always recognise the significance of a person as a child, or even just in a community as a neighbour. You don't realise that this man had worked on so many James Bond films and so many films that, well, I would come to love growing up and that were well known at the time. Since then, this illustration has accompanied me, has always, even when I've moved, been by my bedroom door, so it's something that I've walked past, that I've looked at every single day. But it wasn't until my late teens that I realised who had drawn it, the significance of that little signature on the bottom left of the illustration, Syd Cain. I did some Googling and found out all this, and, well, it just bestowed it with another layer of meaning for me. As I said, I kept it with me. It was an original piece of art that was visually quite interesting, that I'd been gifted all those years ago, but now it was connected to the film industry, an industry that, well, I'd long been interested in and had researched and loved the history of. To look a little deeper at the illustration, it has this sort of sunset glow in the sky. This has always made me think of the end of the dinosaurs as much as anything. I'd been interested, remember this late 1990s, this is the time of walking with dinosaurs, and at the beginning of the decade, of course, Jurassic Park. It was a great era to be a child who was interested in dinosaurs. It's interesting because some of these dinosaurs in the frame actually do remind me of the figures I once had. You may yourself recall some plastic dinosaur figures of a similar style from the 1990s, if you're a child of that decade. The actual names that you see in these illustrations are not related to any sort of dinosaur, at least that I can tell. I suspect that Syd Cain just made up some dinosaur-sounding names, and I'll point particularly to Petinosaurus here. It's almost like he knew someone called Pete, and maybe that face on the dinosaur could be based on that, but that's just a guess. You can actually tell that it's been by a door for most of its time with me, as the frame that it's currently in has a bit of white paint on it from when repainting the door frame. So I will have to get a new frame for it one day, but, well, as I said, it's been with me all this time, and I've walked past it nearly every morning and night, going back and forth. It has become something quite meaningful to me. Now again, I don't suppose this was anything significant for Syd Cain. This was likely an afternoon, maybe a couple of hours of drawing. He was an artist looking for something to draw, and he got inspiration from seeing a child playing with some dinosaur toys. It's interesting to note, actually, that his career began after he gifted a drawing to these visiting filmmakers at RAF Tangmere. He didn't expect anything in return, and he didn't expect to make a career out of working in the film industry. It was just he got pleasure out of drawing, and he gifted it to these filmmakers, and that's where his journey began. And then all the way in semi-retirement, he's still drawing for pleasure as much as anything, and still gifting it to people. So I suppose the only really suitable way to end this video is to say to Syd Cain, who died in 2011, that for all his artworks, for all his collaborations on so many wonderful films, and from me for this dinosaur illustration, thank you, Syd Cain.